When the invisible woman became the most powerful person in the room, no one saw it coming. The office was already buzzing with the rush of the early morning, but no one noticed Evelyn as she entered quietly through the side door, pushing her cleaning cart with the same steady pace. She wore her dark green uniform like armor, her face calm and unreadable, hiding the emotions she kept carefully tucked away. To the executives, Evelyn was invisible. She was just the cleaning lady, someone who wiped down their desks, emptied their trash cans, and occasionally exchanged polite nods with the few who bothered to acknowledge her. It had been like this for years at Hawthorne and Beck, a thriving corporation in the heart of Dallas. Now in her mid-50s, Evelyn had grown accustomed to the routine and the dismissive looks, the offhand jokes they made when they thought she wasn't listening. "They're not even doing anything right now," someone had muttered just last week as Evelyn quietly waited to clean the conference room after their meeting. She never reacted, she never did. She kept her head down, her hands steady as she worked, knowing better than to give them the satisfaction of a response. What they didn't know, what no one in that office knew, was that Evelyn had a secret. A secret so powerful it could shake the entire building to its foundation. But Evelyn wasn't impulsive. She believed in patience, in watching, in waiting. And today, as she made her way down the brightly lit hallways, her calm demeanor masked the fact that she was nearing her breaking point. The morning unfolded as usual. Evelyn polished the glass doors, vacuumed the thick carpet in the lobby, and organized the cluttered desks of those too busy to care about tidiness. She worked diligently even as conversations about promotions and big deals floated through the air. But one conversation caught her attention. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, she wasn't that kind of person, but the voices were loud and impossible to ignore. "The shareholders' meeting is next week," one executive said, his tone smug, bordering on arrogant. "We've got nothing to worry about. The board loves the numbers and the CEO is untouchable. No one's challenging him." Evelyn paused for a moment, gripping the handle of her cart tighter. She knew what they didn't. They had no idea how wrong they were. But Evelyn didn't let her thoughts linger. There was still work to do, and she had to be ready for what was coming. Hawthorne and Beck prided itself on its sleek, modern image. The headquarters, a towering glass building in the center of Dallas, often appeared in business magazines as a symbol of corporate success. Inside, however, the reality was far less glamorous. The culture was ruthless, and the higher you climbed, the less you cared about the people below you. Evelyn had spent nearly a decade in those hallways, quietly observing. She saw the promotions handed out to the loudest voices, not the most qualified. She saw the whispered deals behind closed doors, the way mistakes were covered up by pinning blame on the powerless. And then there was CEO Alan Greaves, a man who exuded arrogance and authority in equal measure. Alan was the kind of leader who commanded respect through fear. His voice boomed in meetings, silencing even the boldest executives. To him, success was everything, and people were just tools to be used. Evelyn often overheard his sarcastic remarks about employees who didn't fit the company's image. "She's still here?" Alan had once said, referring to an older secretary. "Why haven't we retired her yet? It's not like she's adding value." It wasn't just the comments. The company was rife with unethical practices that were swept under the rug. Bonuses were quietly cut for lower-level staff while the leadership celebrated record-breaking profits. Evelyn had heard about inflated expense reports, shady client dealings, and the quiet firing of a whistleblower who dared to speak up. The cleaning staff bore the brunt of the toxic culture, with coworkers reduced to tears after being scolded for a speck of dust. Evelyn had seen paychecks stagnate while workloads increased. And, of course, there was the constant dismissal of their humanity, the way people avoided eye contact or treated them as part of the furniture. One incident still burned in Evelyn's memory. A young intern had accidentally spilled coffee on the marble floor near Alan's office. The intern froze, terrified as Alan rounded the corner. "Are you kidding me?" Alan snapped, eyes darting to Evelyn, who had just walked by with her mop and bucket. "Clean this up." He barked at her as if she were at fault. The intern apologized profusely, but Alan waved him off with a dismissive hand. To him, people like Evelyn and the intern were nothing more than background noise. These moments had piled up over the years, each one adding to the growing weight Evelyn carried. Her patience was unmatched, but she wasn't immune to the sting of disrespect. Yet, Evelyn had never been the type to crumble. She let those moments fuel her resolve, storing them like ammunition for the day she would need them. The employees around her might not have noticed her silence, but it spoke volumes. Evelyn was always watching, always listening. The more she saw, the more she realized that the company's success had come at the expense of its humanity. But Evelyn wasn't just taking notes. She was quietly planning. And soon the pieces would start to fall into place. 4 years, Evelyn had kept her secret tightly guarded, not out of fear but out of strategy. She wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was the largest shareholder in Hawthorne and Beck, a title she'd inherited after the sudden death of her late husband, Martin. Martin had been a quiet investor in the company's early days, accumulating shares when no one believed in its potential. By the time he passed away, those shares had become a controlling stake. At first, Evelyn didn't know what to do with this unexpected power. She wasn't a corporate strategist or a boardroom regular. She was just Evelyn, a woman who had raised 2 kids and found comfort in routine. But over time, as she continued her work at the company, Evelyn began to see the value of her position. Being invisible gave her an advantage. She could observe without being noticed, listen without suspicion, and learn everything she needed to know about the people who thought they ran the company. The tipping point came one evening as Evelyn wiped down the executive lounge. She overheard 2 senior managers laughing over drinks, discussing layoffs. "Some of these people act like their jobs matter," one of them said with a laugh. "They don't realize how replaceable they are." Evelyn stood frozen behind the door, her hand gripping the cleaning cloth. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were real people, people with families, bills, and dreams. Yet to these men they were nothing more than expendable assets. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad. She started writing, unsure of where it would lead, but knowing she could no longer stay silent. She listed the unethical practices she had witnessed, the people who had been mistreated, and the moments that had stuck with her over the years. By the time the sun rose, she had outlined a plan that would change everything. Her first step was to dig deeper. Evelyn used her access to the building to gather information most people would overlook. She took mental notes on conversations, paid attention to schedules, and discreetly glanced at documents left on desks. She wasn't stealing or snooping, she was simply putting the pieces together. The second step was to call in reinforcements. Evelyn had a few trusted allies outside the company: lawyers, financial analysts, and former employees who had left on bad terms. She shared what she knew and asked for their advice. Slowly, they helped her craft a strategy that would not only expose the toxic culture but also secure the company's future. The final step was the hardest. Evelyn knew confronting the CEO and the board would take more than just evidence. It would require courage, composure, and a deep belief in her own worth. She practiced her speech in front of the mirror, her voice steady and firm. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or treated as less than. The shareholders' meeting was less than a week away. Evelyn was ready. She wasn't just walking into that room as the cleaning lady. She was walking in as someone who held the company's future in her hands. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived with an air of confidence radiating through the building. Executives strutted through the hallways, their chatter filled with optimism about another year of record profits. None of them noticed Evelyn, pushing her cleaning cart toward the top-floor conference room, her face calm and unreadable. The boardroom was pristine, a stark contrast to the rest of the office. Its long, polished table gleamed under soft lighting, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Dallas skyline. Around the table sat the company's most powerful figures, including Alan Greaves sitting at the head. His posture was commanding, his smirk exuding arrogance. Evelyn entered quietly, placing a pitcher of water on the side table. No one looked at her, she was part of the backdrop. But this time she didn't leave. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Heads turned, confused and slightly annoyed. Alan barely glanced at her. "We're in the middle of something," he said dismissively. "I know," Evelyn replied, her tone steady but firm. "That's why I'm here." Alan leaned back in his chair, a condescending smile spreading across his face. "Unless you're here to clean up after us, I suggest you leave." Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, pulling a folder from her cart and placing it on the table. The logo of Hawthorne and Beck was stamped on the front, along with the words, "Shareholders Report." The room fell silent. Alan's smirk faltered as Evelyn began to speak. "For years," she said, her voice unwavering, "I've watched this company thrive on the backs of people you refuse to see. I've seen employees mistreated, ethical lines crossed, and profits prioritized over humanity. And I've stayed quiet, until now." Murmurs erupted around the table. One of the board members leaned forward, squinting at the folder. "What is this?" he asked. "This," Evelyn said, opening the folder, "is proof. Proof of the unethical practices, the mismanagement, and the outright disregard for the people who make this company run. Alan's voice boomed across the room. Who do you think you are, coming in here and making accusations? You're a cleaning lady? Evelyn met his glare with a calmness that shook the room. No, Mr. Greaves, I'm the majority shareholder of Hawthorne and Beck. And today I'm firing you. The shock rippled through the room like thunder. Alan's face turned pale as the words sank in. You're joking, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Evelyn didn't blink. No, Mr. Greaves. I'm not. She turned to the board members, her gaze sharp. I've spent years gathering evidence and it's all here. The inflated expense reports, the unethical layoffs, the harassment complaints you've buried. I have the power to vote you out and I'm using it. The room erupted into chaos. Alan tried to argue, his voice rising in desperation, but one by one, the board members turned to Evelyn, reviewing the evidence and confirming her claims. It didn't take long for the vote to happen. Evelyn had done her homework, and the evidence she presented left no room for doubt. Alan Greaves was removed from his position that same afternoon. His protests fell on deaf ears as security escorted him out of the building. Evelyn stood in the boardroom, her back straight and her expression calm. The executives who had once ignored her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and guilt. But Evelyn wasn't looking for their approval. She had already set her sights on what came next. The news of Alan's dismissal spread through the company like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire office was buzzing with disbelief and speculation. How could the cleaning lady, quiet, unassuming Evelyn, have been the majority shareholder all along? Whispers filled the break rooms and hallways, but this time they weren't dismissive. They were filled with respect, admiration, and even a hint of guilt. Evelyn, however, didn't bask in the attention. She returned to the office the next day, not with a mop and bucket, but with a clipboard and a plan. She wasn't just here to fire a toxic CEO. She was here to change the company's future. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn worked tirelessly to implement change. She started with the people who had been overlooked for years. Raises were given to the cleaning staff and other underappreciated workers. Evelyn made sure HR took harassment and discrimination complaints seriously, introducing a third-party watchdog to ensure transparency. She addressed the toxic culture that had festered under Alan's leadership. The board, once complicit in his actions, now found themselves held accountable. Evelyn insisted on regular training focused on ethics, inclusion, and employee well-being. For the first time in years, employees at Hawthorne and Beck felt seen, heard, and valued. But Evelyn didn't stop there. She hosted town hall meetings, inviting employees at every level to share their experiences and ideas. She listened, took notes, and made sure everyone had a voice in shaping the company's future. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked through the office, she was stopped by a young intern, the same one who had spilled coffee near Alan's office months ago. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere, "for everything you've changed." Evelyn smiled warmly. "No, we've changed this place together." Outside the building, the Dallas skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun. Evelyn stood for a moment, looking up at the towering glass structure she had once entered unnoticed. It had been a long road, but she had done what many thought was impossible. This wasn't just about firing a CEO or exposing corruption. It was about showing that no matter how invisible someone might feel, they can hold the power to create meaningful change. Evelyn had proven that resilience, patience, and integrity could triumph over arrogance and greed. She took a deep breath, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Then she walked away, not to fade into the background, but to embrace a new chapter in her life. Life often underestimates the quiet strength of those who observe, endure, and act when the time is right. Evelyn's story reminds us that the most unexpected people can become the catalysts for profound change.